Our next panelist is an award-winning journalist and the CEO of PumaPodcast, Roby Alampay. He is an anchor presenter on 2 nightly programs on Signal TV's all-news cable channel One News. Until recently, he was the editor-in-chief of the Philippines' oldest and leading business news provider, Business World. As a backstory, last year it was Roby who had this crazy idea of starting a podcast about communication and social change. We know we wouldn't be here today without Roby's vision, so thank you for that, Roby. Roby will now talk about media's responsibility in promoting human rights in the time of COVID-19. Let me give you Roby Alampay.
Hello. Good afternoon to everybody. Let me start off by saying Oya, you're giving me too much credit. I Give A Hoot is a wonderful project, but if I remember correctly, it was Mika and you who really said that we have this agency, this communications agency that really focuses on giving platform and power to people who are advocating for particular causes. And that really was what got to me. And it was also convenient because I think it had something to do with our own vision for Puma Podcast, in that we feel that the podcasting platform lends itself to, as one of our more famous podcasters, Randy David, said, the unhurried conversation, more thoughtful discussions, partly because it's a function of not being able to compete on the level of breaking news, on all of this frenetic pace of information that wouldn't even allow you to breathe, much less think. And we thought that we could turn that into an advantage. And therefore, precisely podcasting and the project that we've embarked on and this kind of conversation is precisely the kind of thing that we need more of. That said, I think when you start up a podcasting company, it goes, I would like to think, into how I am. It's something that I think is important for people to appreciate. Notwithstanding the fact that I am a journalist, I do consider myself an optimist. I understand conceptually when you say hope-based communications, when Thomas says hope-based communications, I understand, I think, at core and at heart what that means. I'd like to think that our missions and our values there are aligned. But as a journalist, it does make the eyebrows go up. Hope. It's not necessarily what, I don't know if it's old school, but it's not necessarily what I was brought up to think. Journalism is about providing hope. Not necessarily. I have always thought of journalism as agnostic. I've always thought of journalism and news and independent media as something that the most optimistic side of it is just it trusts the people. It trusts the crowd. It trusts that when people are fully informed for both what can be perceived as skeptical or even overly skeptical or overly cynical, but at the same time are given the information that allows them to think critically and even be hopeful that they can make that distinction on their own and they can make their decisions on their own. So I start with that. I'm an optimist. At the same time, I'm a journalist. I'm glad that Thomas brought up the word empathy because it quickly reassured me and gave me pause to think, okay, yes, I think that's where we can start. Not so much with a mission to provide hope, but rather to start with empathy. I think when you speak of moment, Thomas, I think there's something convenient about the current moment in that whether or not you believe in hope-based communications, whether or not the important thing for you is just understanding the pulse of the people and empathizing with them, not necessarily framing it as hope, doesn't matter. Because the moment right now, my sense of it as a journalist, as an editor, is that people are looking for hope. It's not a cause that I'm pushing. It's not a particular advocacy. But purely editorially, I feel that people are looking for stories of hope, whether they call it hope, or stories of looking forward, looking up. At its most base, I think the stories that people are looking for it's still about health and safety. But I also think that people are looking for reasons and reassurances and reminders on how to move forward, how to pick themselves up, how to get up again, and how to walk again. So I think there's a way of moving forward on that topic. And then you throw in the final twist. You gave me the topic of hope in particular for human rights in the Philippines. And again, it throws you for a loop. How can a journalist talk about hope for human rights in the Philippines at this particular moment? It's ironic on very many levels, and it keeps turning on very many levels. One ironic thing is we know that this crisis, and it is a crisis, speaking as a journalist, but this crisis, this moment, was in fact aggravated by the lack of human rights in China. It was in fact aggravated from the very start by an absence of free expression and a lack of press freedom. And we know also that FOI, freedom of information, press freedom, free expression, freedom of opinion, our ability to provide commentary is also the things that will help to provide solutions and get us out of this mess. It's ironic, as I said, to look at it that way, because just in this past week, we have been given proofs of and evidence of how concretely that is true. Not necessarily on the level of solving COVID or defeating COVID, but all the other social and economic and political and social problems that we now confront. In the past week, what has the Philippines experienced? Because of free expression, because of press freedom, because of social media, OFWs were overnight able to overturn an adjustment in their fees, something that people felt very unjust, very arbitrary. But overnight, because of the social movement, that was defeated. If the news that's coming out right at this hour is true, press freedom, free expression, and free commentary on social media platforms and public outrage is going to result in some level of police accountability. It was the outrage of people yesterday that really shouted down what people perceive as outright lies from a high-ranking police officials. And now it seems, according to Malacanang, there will be an official investigation looking at specific and probable sanctions against these high-ranking police officials. So you have these evidence that free expression, press freedom, human rights in general empowers us and allows us to find, as you said, our own common understanding of what can get us out of this mess collectively and as a community. I'll end with this note. What's ironic, I think, and what's the challenge for us in terms of hope-based communications, particularly for human rights, what's ironic is that we have proven time and again the value of human rights when it comes to various advocacies, whether it's agriculture or putting food on the table or keeping prices in check or demanding accountability of our people or demanding accountability and transparency in the distribution of social amelioration funds on the level of barangay officials, right? But when it comes to human rights, advocating for the sake of human rights, that is where there is a disconnect. People will appreciate human rights, press freedom, their ability to provide commentary when it comes to the very concrete things that affect their lives. And yet human rights, for its own sake, remains a very nebulous topic. That, I think, is where I will round out to hope-based communications, hopefully helping us to bring us to a better normal and seizing this moment and our examples to say that in the better normal that we're working towards, human rights itself, let's not forget what human rights did for us during this moment, during this crisis. It did allow us to fight for transparency. It allowed us to fight for a rule of law. It allowed us to fight for prices, for taxes, and many, many things that kept us alive. May we move forward to a better normal when human rights, for the sake of human rights, will also then be aided by all of these examples, and we can be more concrete in empathizing with people and in people empathizing and understanding the value of human rights.